CBS 46 News presents Public Affairs on Peach.
Well, good Saturday morning to you. I'm Ben Swan, and today we're going to talk about the race for the White House. And who better to talk about the presidential campaign than our own political analyst, Bill Nigut.
Hey,
Bill,
Ben.
thanks for being here. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
All right, so let's start with the Republicans. They had their big debate on Wednesday
They
night.
sure
What,
did.
23 million people tuning in
Yeah.
to CNN to watch 3 hours. It was as long as a football game.
Yeah, I tweeted toward the end of it, last segment, candidates come out in pajamas.
Yeah, really. It was interesting to watch a 3-hour debate, well, for those who are interested in that kind of stuff, right? To watch kind of the fatigue kind of set in. Let's start there, because as we watched, it started off pretty raucous. A lot of interaction between candidates. We'll get to some of those clips in just a little bit. But as we watched that happen, towards the end of the debate, some of these candidates started to fade a little bit. Looked like they were getting exhausted.
I think that's right. And what's interesting is the guy who seemed to fade the most was the front runner, Donald Trump. And we'll talk about what the impact, the implications of that might be as we go through the show today.
Now, the person who's getting probably the most attention, we saw her there for just a second, Carly Fiorina, getting a lot of attention after this debate. And a lot of the pundits, and you know, Bill, I'm not a big fan of pundits, because
Okay.
what do? They sit up there and they all repeat each other. They
Right.
regurgitate what they think is the
Right.
right thing to say. Carly Fiorina, they're all saying, won the debate. Do you think she's going to get a bump out of this, and why is that?
Well, I do think she'll get a bump. She did present herself very, very well. She's obviously authoritative. She's self-assured. She's knowledgeable. Now, she made a number of statements that the fact checkers are having a field day with. She seems to know what she's talking about, but if you go over some of her statements, she's getting a lot of pushback from people who say she's just wrong on a number of issues. But before we talk about that, yeah, she'll get a bump. She's bringing in a lot more money all of a sudden, and so it will
That
be
always
interesting.
helps.
Yeah, of course. But we'll see what happens when she's quizzed on some of the statements she made and whether they were accurate or not.
It is kind of fascinating that among the top kind of 3, non-establishment candidates, if you want to call them that, you've got, obviously Donald Trump first. Ben Carson had been polling very strongly. We'll talk about him in a few minutes.
Yeah.
He did not have a good debate night. It didn't seem like. And then Carly Fiorina, who's further down in the pack, but as you mentioned, did well, and she'll probably be rising at least to number 3 by now.
I think that's probably right.
Yeah, she'll do well. But she was very heavy on specifics. Like,
Yeah.
she got into a lot of detail about, how many battalions she thought that should be in the U.S. military. And she got into a lot of detail about what she would do with Netanyahu and with Putin. And yet, as you said, some of the folks who were looking at this are saying, wait a minute, it almost seems like she had a scorecard and she had memorized some of these talking points, and it wasn't necessarily coming from a genuine place of knowledge.
I think that's a really good point. Some of the things, the remarks she made on the debate the other night are remarks that she has made in virtually the same way in other settings before now. That doesn't mean she isn't effective in communicating, but people who think she's being spontaneous are wrong. She has her talking points down just like everybody else does.
Everyone else has their talking points, minus maybe Donald Trump, who has his one-liners.
Yeah.
They aren't necessarily talking points, because
Right.
they do seem to be kind of fluid in what they do. Let's talk about Jeb Bush, because here's a guy who, as we talked about kind of pre-debate, you and I had this conversation about Jeb, and what does he need to do to look stronger, look better? He did the T-shirt thing the other day, which almost looked like nonsense to me, the Reagan-Bush 84. How do you think he performed?
Well, he started pretty slowly, don't you think? I mean, for a stretch there in the first 45 minutes or so, I didn't think we heard much from him, and he had that sort of laid-back quality that people have been concerned about. But he kicked in about 45, 50 minutes in and started engaging with Donald Trump, especially around this issue of whether Trump, in fact, was lobbying him and Florida officials to get a casino in Florida. And from that exchange on, I thought Jeb Bush woke up, and I think his supporters were happy with his performance throughout the latter half of the debate.
Now, I will say, on the debate back and forth between Trump and Bush over the casino issue, probably one of Bush's better moments, because Donald Trump dismissed him very easily. No, that wasn't true, and then said, believe me, if I wanted it, I would have gotten it, right? Just dismissed him.
Right.
And Bush wouldn't let him just dismiss it.
Right.
Now, fact-checking that, 2014, Donald Trump was in Florida and was, in fact, pushing for a casino, lobbying for it. Obviously, that was after Bush was out of office as governor. But he absolutely was in Florida in 2014, and he was trying to shop his golf courses in Florida as potential sites for casinos.
Well, I think, going back even further than that, while Bush was governor, the Trump organization was working very hard to help the Seminole Indians get a casino down there, which Trump's team wanted to manage. So basically, Bush got the better of that argument because he's right that Trump tried to move in while Jeb was governor, and it didn't happen. They didn't meet over that, however.
That's right, and so it is interesting to watch that pushback. Now, very quickly, on Bush's kind of pushback about his wife.
Yeah.
And the line about she's right there in the audience, you can apologize to her. To me, that felt contrived. It felt as if the campaign was sitting there saying, if you get a chance to call him out on your wife, it'll make you look stronger, tougher. I don't think it necessarily made him look good.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you evaluate that. I hear what you're saying. Trump said, I won't apologize. Yeah, you could make the argument that at that moment, Jeb could have pushed back a little bit harder and said, you'd better do it, you'd better apologize. But I don't think it was a Michael Dukakis moment from that debate back in '88.
And had he pushed too hard, it might have been the Al Gore moment of approaching George W. Bush and not being able to force him to do anything.
There you go.
All right, well, much more of this discussion coming up. After the break, we're going to share some of the more interesting exchanges. We'll show you the video from Wednesday night's debate.